these are all the things that I have done, the many hats I've worn in this industry. I don't think I'm done with my job descriptions yet. These are the labels that are on those hats today. Ceilings Unlimited is my own production company. I just produced a film on climate change for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Go to proofofpropaganda.com and download or buy the DVD, please. USA Video Interactive is really the thing most related to what I'm talking about today. They are a digital watermarking technology company. And NeoPixis is the body that holds patents I have my name on for something we call nonlinear production and distribution. And I'm going to start by telling you that piracy is a really old problem. In fact, piracy actually could be sort of described as the origins of Hollywood. Patent companies, which was Edison's idea, was an attempt to keep every film that was made under the control of the people who held the patents that owned the companies. Hollywood, and most of what we think of as the business today, were people who didn't want to pay that royalty. Okay, so they did a variety of strategies, not least of which was they came to California and tried to stay out of the reach of the patent companies. So piracy, the idea that there is a technology or a right that is held by some and that others attempt to escape, is actually endemic and original to our business. There's no really separating it. Once that set of people who are now, we think of as the founders of the Hollywood model, organized their own business, there was thievery then. But in those days, the only thievery was really, you'd steal a print. If you had a lab, you might borrow a print and make an illegal copy, but it was still basically you had to have a print because there was no other way really to sell the experience of a movie except have a print that then you could put in a theater. It could even be a storefront that you just threw a sheet up in, but it was still, you had to have a print. And print piracy has always been kind of an inside job. That's persisted also through the years. I remember when I first started working in this business, one of the jobs I had was in a lab down in Hollywood called CFI, and we would work in little dark rooms, and every once in a while we'd go outside and take a break, and there would be trucks in the parking lot full of cans of print. And I remember, one day they were loading one of those trucks, and I was asked the guy, "Hey, that's a current release." "Oh yeah, but this is salvage." And I'm thinking, there's no way a current print is going to salvage. No, that current print is going to some market where the studio won't see any of the revenue. Okay, it's a very old problem, and today it's based on what you can't really see too well here, files. And the thing about files is, that's really different than stealing a print, is that when somebody steals a print, that was actually an asset that the owner could have put in a theater and made money with. Today, when they steal a file, studio still has its file and can keep right on making money with it. And this is one of the main distinctions about piracy today that we'll get to in a moment. Now, watermarks also aren't new. They've been around a long time. And it's only recently, though, that they've been brought to this business to address the issue of piracy. First of all, I want to define piracy. It's not just, as I said, the distinction of taking something. When we think of pirates in the traditional sense, those are guys that board your ship and take you and maybe your life, and certainly what's on your boat. Okay? The current pirate doesn't necessarily take anybody's stuff. They make unauthorized use of your stuff. Okay? Whatever your content might be, they take it, package it, and deliver it in a way that benefits them and not you. So it's use outside license. Okay? Now, it also has to be a use outside license where it's derived from that license. Otherwise, there's no chain of custody where you can claim any loss. Okay? So if a studio hasn't maintained its license, hasn't maintained a good fence around its property, somebody stealing it isn't really going to be a crime. It might cost the studio some value, but it's not necessarily something that we can call piracy under the way it's interpreted today, particularly in the law. The other thing that's really interesting is that piracy doesn't require a transaction to have occurred. People will steal your files, and they'll put it up, and they'll use it to drive you to buy something else. So if you can go see Avatar for free online, and they happen to catch your eye and you read an ad or click on an ad, that's where they make their money. The transaction doesn't have to be for that piece of property for it to constitute piracy as it's interpreted and understood in the courts today. That's why the RIAA can go after some mom who's just downloaded some music. She's still stealing even though she didn't necessarily participate in a transaction. Now, defining watermarks is a little more difficult because watermark is a really old concept. They began in the 13th century. They were they're used because paper makers needed to distinguish their paper from another guy's paper. It had to be visible. Sometimes they were symbols. Sometimes they were actually the initial of the water maker. And they were used mainly to say, this is my product, or this is how good my product is compared to somebody else's. Most interesting enough, water was not used to make them. You know, water was used to make the paper, and while the paper was still wet, they would put them in forms that would have little wires that would make the image, and it was the chemistry of the paper drying that created the watermark. Let's move on. There we go. Today, in the 20th century technology of watermarks, watermarks are not visible. Their purpose is to be invisible. They do not make images. They're usually hexadecimal numbers. Sometimes they're just regular numbers. They're rarely actual information that the human can understand or interpret. And they usually are used in the form of what are called keys. The key is something that points you at a database that tells you who owned this, who was in the transaction, what are the rights that are related, and so on. Plus, they're not actually in the images. Okay? When most of you think of watermarks, you think of what's on paper. You have an image. Somebody put a watermark in the middle of that image. We're going to look at pictures that have watermarks, but the watermarks are in the signal that generates the picture. There are a lot of different technologies in use today. None of them are intended to make any image change at all. In fact, that's one of the key things that we look for in watermarks, is that they don't alter the image visible to the audience at all. Another really important thing is what our watermarks aren't. So in the current conversation about security of content, there are a lot of different technologies, and watermarks are not digital rights management. Digital rights management are things, you know, when you have to sign in and validate yourself at a website, that you have a password, or that you had to be approved by some administrator, or you have to show that you have the license to a particular technology. Those are permission schemes. And those are all part of digital rights management. Another aspect of digital rights management are various kinds of gates. You have to have permissions, or the product you have must indicate that it's legal so that it will pass through a particular piece of software or hardware that's termed a gate, so you get to see the product. Fingerprints are another thing that are like watermarks, but they're not at all. I'm going to give you some examples of both of these things here in a moment, so I'll explain fingerprints. But fingerprints are about identifying an individual thing, as opposed to security or theft deterrence. So here is an example of a flowchart for a digital rights management scheme. And really important is that it starts there with that thing that's got a lock, where the content is packaged. All right, this is a key part of the concept of digital rights management. We're going to keep things secure, and we're going to lock it up. And at the end of these various set of steps, you get to see the movie, we'll say in this case, or whatever that content is. It's about making sure you have the right to watch it. And this is how it actually gets interpreted in popular culture. It's a way to handcuff you, the consumer. Okay? There's nothing about digital rights management that makes it easier to get you to have a transaction to get yourself content. It always becomes an extra step along the way while you're trying to pay for it or download it or buy it in whatever way. My favorite way to talk about this is to give you the allegory of money. Now, we all know the value of money, and we all know you can go to a bank and get some. And if they treated money at banks the way, say, the music industry has tried to treat music, you wouldn't go to banks because it's inconvenient. Okay? And they wonder why their business has gone down. It's just a simple little thing. We like things to be easy, and we don't like to be presumed that we're trying to steal it. And so here, I'm going to give you an example of fingerprints. Now, you have in this image a lot of iconic, recognizable items. Any bit of this gets taken and put into an analyzer of the digital content that makes that image, and then we can have that fingerprint. It's often expressed in sort of various kinds of math that programmers like to use. But essentially, if I took that eye image and I told the program, every time you see that particular fingerprint, flag it for me and call it avatar. Well, that's how they're doing this at YouTube right now. Why YouTube is essentially Hollywood friendly is that they have a lot of technology to analyze that. So it doesn't matter if I shift the raster or if I crop it or I pull it out or I sample it anyway. When that particular fingerprint goes by, it's going to say avatar. And somebody is going to get a report that says these are the things you better check for avatar content because we're going to pay Fox for advertising that gets linked to that clip, which is how YouTube's become a going business as opposed to a hole in the ground. So fingerprinting is about seeing something like your fingerprint and saying, that belongs to so-and-so, let's associate and credit it with it. It has nothing to do with keeping somebody from putting avatar on YouTube. And here's another problem with that, though, is that this is just the list of ways that you can have a VGA format display. For every single kind of machine that makes an image, LCD screens, the projector here, your screens at home, the projectors in theaters, there are a set of formats that it will produce. And because of that, the way in which the fingerprint can be read is very, very complicated, which is why there are so many fingerprinting technologies out there, because somebody's trying to figure out the best mousetrap for fingerprinting has not occurred yet. So that's all about to say, watermarking is not that. What watermarking is today is something we call steganography. That is how we hide information. And its origins also are really ancient. Back in the days when the only way you could actually have communications between heads of state was somebody went as an ambassador or emissary. Well, that person didn't get to like have the conversation with your corresponding peer and then send them a note back without knowing that that note was going to get read. You could put a seal on it, but people figured out how to break and fake seals pretty well. So they came up with secret writing, hidden writing, ways to hide things inside other documents. And all this began to become something known as steganography. These are all the things that through the years steganography has been really, really used for. And it's only in the last 30 years that it's come of interest in this area called data protection. By the way, everything that's in a file is considered data. So when we have a movie that's a file, it too is data. And one of the interesting things about it is that in a digitally watermarked item today, there isn't anything to see. Okay? What's on the left is unmarked. What's on the right is marked. And in an ideal scenario, you can't tell the difference. In fact, people with really, really good eyes shouldn't be able to tell the difference because the image shouldn't be there. Now, that's not to say that we haven't used watermark ideas where we do put things in the picture, and I'll cover that detail in a moment. But for the main, and I mean 95% of how we think of digital watermarks today, it's about making it invisible, and it's about being able to have a machine look at the image and extract information and tell us, is that a legal use or not? The qualities of a watermark today, first and foremost, must be transparent. We spend millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to make beautiful pictures, and we don't want anybody screwing them up. So first and foremost, it can't do anything to the quality of the product. Second, it must be robust. Now, robust means that it's really hard for people to take it apart or remove it or disable it in any way. The main things that are the classic example is what we call the analog hole. You heard a talk today about people capturing films in theaters. Well, that's a pretty ideal way because your eye looks at a screen. What possible invisible information could you be gleaning from that? What could be captured by another camera that then would be read by a machine? Well, it turns out there are a lot of really cool and groovy technologies that will pass from an image projected on a screen into another machine and still be readable. And it's really magic and it's very cool. And it's expected that it'll drive pirates crazy once they actually start getting busted in any sort of widespread way. The other thing about it is a lightweight payload. If we have a typical DVD of 4.7 gigabytes, how much of that must be used to add a watermark? Well, we currently talk about it in terms of kilobytes per gigabyte, which is a pretty small amount. The other thing that must be lightweight is the amount of time and energy it takes to put this information into the signal, and that's expressed in how many more cycles of my server will it require to watermark that before I serve it up to the paying customer. And the last one I call inscrutable. It shouldn't be something that anybody then can read. If you're a studio and you're using watermarks to mark every one of your transactions, you don't want that data available to anybody else. So as a company that provides watermarks, USA Video Interactive doesn't want to know who our customers' customers are. We want that information to be in their hands. That's where appropriately that information is. Okay, so inscrutable means that it's readable by the content copyright owner. It's available for them to use, and we'll talk about what those uses are in a moment, but it can't really be read by anybody else. There's a competitor out there, a company called Verimatrix. They make a neat little product that actually creates a machine-readable output so that you can actually see the key number on a screen after you've run it through the reader. But it's just a number. If you don't have the database that number's to, you don't really have any true information. So those are the things that we're currently looking for in products. So what do you do when you have a digital watermark? Well, you can try and prevent, or you can try and enforce. So we'll go through the prohibition idea. Anybody here ever lived through a prohibition? You don't know it, but you're living through one right now. You're prohibited from all sorts of things, particularly around content. And it's all an attempt to stop you from stealing. The classic thing that was said by a representative of the MPAA, God, it'd be about 8 or 9 years ago, is we're just trying to keep honest people honest. Anybody in here who's not honest? Or you're all offended by that statement, I hope, right? So it's really a remarkable thing that we start off with a strategy that assumes our customers are thieves. And guess what the results are? Well, actually, we are either thieves or we just don't buy from people who are suspicious of us. But the primary thing that happens is that we are in the business on the prohibition side of preventing people from doing transactions. So while there are some people who might use all this magic that way, the company I worked with and a couple of others really look at the enforcement side. And the enforcement side, the catchphrase we use is you embed proof to catch crooks. Because what we really care about are the people who steal and who make money that then the content owner can't actually make. That requires a chain of custody. Now, chain of custody is a legal term which, and for which watermarks have been approved or endorsed by case law. And then that can be used to prosecute a person. And then once they're prosecuted, they can actually be punished. And the goal of all of those is to make it easy for you to get the content you want. Okay, so it's a distinct difference. Prevention is about don't let you do stuff. Enforcement is about let you do stuff, just we're going to bust people who don't do it legally. Now, in order to be inside the legal domain, you have to be able to be what's called forensic. So we're all familiar with TV shows about forensic police work. Well, that's because the work has to go to court. Forensic has nothing to do with microscopes. It has to do with it goes to court, and it has a legal use. And in the matter of content, there must be a demonstrable chain of custody. In other words, there must have been somewhere where this material, this content, was licensed for use. How many of you, when you buy a DVD, think you own the movie? Oh, you do, okay. Nobody else. I'm glad to see you're all educated. Well, many people in this culture do think they own the movie because they own a piece of plastic. But if you were to read the fine print, what you own is a license to enjoy the content that's on that piece of plastic, okay? So the chain of custody is an ability to say how a piece of content has been licensed as it's moved through the chain of retail transaction or whatever transaction. So in the case of a post-production company, they have a license to do the work they're supposed to do and hand it back. They don't have a license to slip it out the side door and sell it to a guy who's going to duplicate it and sell it on the streets of downtown Los Angeles. Okay? It must reference a license use. In other words, when I see a copyright record, or when I see a key, and when I go to the database for that watermark, and I see that key, there must be a licensed, authorized use, or I don't have a chain of custody that then I can go back to that, say this is where it crossed the line from legitimate use to illegitimate use. And then the other thing we do with watermarks is when they show up outside is to go, that's a legal piece being sold in an illegal way. And then we have the ability to actually prosecute the person who stole or prosecute the people who are using stolen material. So one of the challenges that we have in the area of content is it's not property like your diamond ring, your good watch, your car. It's an idea, it's an experience. And how do you prove somebody stole that from somebody else? Providing that experience is the business of theater owners. Some theater owner decides to access that experience a different way, they're then criminal. Proving that becomes a difficult set of challenges. We'll get to that in a moment as well. So here's the results that we've seen. On the prevention side, there's been no reduction of piracy. We've got 15 really good, hard years where we've spent a lot of money, and there has just been, you know, what we have out there right now is a proven audience of about 50 million people who are happy to steal. They are an established marketplace. What we also did as an industry is we exported the costs. Today, when you buy a DVD player, within its little chips and circuits are a set of gates and technologies to actually, you know, if you, for instance, have a Region 2 DVD and you move to Region 1, well, you're not going to be able to play it anymore because the little dumb machine that works in that new territory knows the difference. And we made the consumer electronics and the IT industries pay for all that technology. The motion picture industry, because it has content control, successfully lobbied those guys into doing all the work and spending all the money to make those schemes work. That didn't make us real popular, but they did it anyhow because they want to be able to leverage what Hollywood has. The result is that the DVD player you buy today isn't as functional in terms of its capabilities as a DVD player you might have bought the first year they came out. You're paying less for them, but you pay even less if we hadn't exported the costs, and they would do more if we hadn't put these things into them. The result of that is, well, there's a lot of people today who think it's fun to hack and tweak the noses of large multinational corporations. So we've created and inspired a set of opponents. That in turn has led to a lot of negative publicity. You know, those would be bad enough, but then we also go out and we sue mom and pop for actually having our stuff on their desktops. And that in turn has meant we've alienated a few of our customers. One of my favorite examples is when VHS became a dominant format. The brand Disney was a trusted name. Today, you can find people who will vilify Disney because they've actually sued schools for putting the pictures of Mickey Mouse on their kindergarten walls. Okay? It's been a terrible chain of events. And it's not that they shouldn't own Mickey Mouse, it's just how they've gone about enforcing it. And there you go, enforcement. So we have some arrests. We have some exclusions. And exclusion means we have to go back and face the music, and the fact is that a certain percentage of all theft comes from within our own business. So when you discover that the DVD duplicator is actually duplicating a few extra 10,000 on the side and selling them, you not only have the problem of that person is stealing from you, you have the problem of getting rid of them and replacing their capacity in your supply chain. If you are dependent on every DVD replicator out there to get your product in a wide release, can you afford to get rid of that? Can you afford to eliminate what has been an important part of how you make money? So a very difficult thing that challenges our industry is how do we actually bust the pirates that are within our own sector? And then we have these questions. We don't know what will happen. I know with the clients we have currently, people have been getting busted, but they do not want to tell the world. Our model is you tell everybody, that guy there stole from us and here he is going to jail, or here he is paying, or he's losing his business, or whatever it is, as a way to disincentivize other people. That hasn't been industry policy. The policy has been, let's keep it a secret. It's all hush-hush. It's like spy stuff. And we're very frustrated by the fact that the industry doesn't understand not the collateral values, saying we're busting real criminals as opposed to moms and pops. So here are the challenges. We're dependent upon external systems. The first is that as movie industry, we have to put our product through other people's systems in order to reach audiences. Since we no longer own the entire chain that delivers it up, we are dependent on other people. So the other people must also secure. So back in the old days, that meant the projectionist has to be honest. The projectionist can't slip the reel out during the middle of the night, have it duplicated at the friend's lab, and then have it back the next day. Okay? Today that means that that same person, the projectionist, doesn't like give somebody access to the booth where they set up the camera and let them plug straight into the audio so they don't have anybody whispering in the theater. Okay? We're not just dependent upon those external systems. We're also dependent on the fact that law enforcement today has a lot of problems. They've got a lot of issues, and they don't really necessarily think that copyright infringement of movies is a big issue. In the city of Los Angeles, the guy in charge of movie theft is on the vice squad. Okay? So any given day he can like go, should I walk the streets of Hollywood Or should I go downtown and try and find people with pirated DVDs? Which one's really more of an issue of public safety? Okay? The FBI unit that's stationed in Westwood in the federal building, they've got a long list of things, of which this is just one to do. So we have that issue. Second is in courts. To go to court to enforce your copyright means that you need the cooperation of a prosecuting attorney. So you have to have resources of the court, the system that's supposed to adjudicate and impart justice. And you have to do everything you can to push a case through it. And that's just domestically. In international law, you have countries that have no real understanding of copyright. They don't have laws that enforce copyright the same way as we do here. And then you have the public perception, which at the end of the day is, you guys make a lot of money. You know, why should I be worried about you? George Clooney's doing fine. Okay? So we have these many challenges about this. And I want to go back to this external system issue, because many of the external systems are within our industry. Okay? A big deal was made because, 10 years ago, somebody actually worked at a duplicating facility, actually got prosecuted, and actually got prison. Okay? The company that employed those guys had almost 2 years of lag in business because nobody wanted to go to them. You know, but they'd proven they'd bust their own employees. It should have made people more confident in that company, and instead it worked the other way around. So within our own industry, we have a very poor understanding of the value of keeping a respect for copyright. The most famous case of the last year, Wolverine. Okay, the Wolverine version that hit the internet ahead of release came right out of post-production. Okay? That was clearly an inside job. There was no way that was a camcorder. Right? Nobody's been busted yet. If we had ubiquitous watermarking where every time a copy of a file went out, the moment that hit the internet, you could have gone back to the person whose desk it came from and went, so you're either going to be out of this business or you're going to tell us who you sold it to. You know, and then suddenly people's careers would be on the line to keep the content they work on secure. But that's not true today, and we're not sure when it's going to happen. So what would we get if Hollywood actually took a ubiquitous watermarking approach and took an enforcement approach? Well, the first thing is that we have access to 50 million new customers. Now, some of those people are never going to want to buy. They steal because they like to steal. They're cheap, they're broke, whatever. But it would also mean that some of them, we could make it easier for them to get the movies than if they went through. I mean, anybody here actually run BitTorrent? Anybody ever set up and do a download? Yeah. Did it take some time? Would you like it to have been easier? Wow. There you go. So and it's not that it's illegal. It's this. But if you go to steal that way, you have to like download something. You'll get the little warning going, this isn't certified software. Da, 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 da. So there would be this chunk of market that just like the healthcare companies just got. You know, it'd be like 40 million new people you could sell your products to. Okay? There would be new markets. There are people that we do not reach currently. People who do not go to the theater. People who will not watch a movie on television. They'll watch a movie on a computer. They'll watch a movie on a cell phone. So there are new markets emerging that we have to use file-based stuff to go to. We must come up with a way to be secure. And right now we can't access them. Then we have new channels to existing markets. You know, we're moving towards technology that will enable you to disconnect your cable and through your internet connection, get all the things you currently get as TV. All of them are going to be rife with new opportunities for people to steal. And we need a way to secure this. And in fact, the most ubiquitous use, or the widest use of watermarking today is in tracking or putting a watermarking in at the set-top box with cable companies. We're going to have to be able to do that for websites or other channels such as Hulu. And currently we don't. And probably the most significant thing is that if a company actually gets in the business of delivering you files and giving you a personal watermark, they're going to know a lot about you and what you like to watch. They're going to get to ask you. They're going to be able to establish a personal relationship and have much more targeted marketing. They're going to be able to say, gee, what kind of products, who are the 25 million people that want to see this movie before we make it? as opposed to what they do now, which is best a lot of guessing. Okay, so these are the fundamental things that I can tell you. We could go back and hit every one of these little slides, and I could spend a lot more time with you about specific technologies, but I'm going to tell you that the fundamental concept is that we want to enable transactions. We want to put proof in and through watermarks that allow us to bust people who actually steal. That's the real idea behind watermarking today. Most of what you're seeing out there as security today is about prevention. And I'm going to tell you a little story that I was involved 2.5 years ago now with the man who is credited with putting all of the industry on DVDs. He got all the major studios to agree. His name's Walter Lieberfarb, or Warren. Thank you. And Warren has an idea that he's been trying to promote now for, God, almost 5 years to create what's called the home video window. So the window is, we put it in the theater. That's the flagship market, you know. And then the next window is DVDs. And the next window is cable, you know. And so there's these windows. So Warren has this idea that between the release in the movies and the release in DVD, there could be a 6-week period in which you and any of the other people who spent the average of $3,000 on their home theater could have a weekend license for, say, $20. And you would get a high-quality file delivered to you that you could watch inside that window. Now, it's estimated based on the CE industry sales of home theaters that that is several $100 million market on an annual basis. New market. People who are early buyers of the DVDs. Yes, you'd be eroding the DVD, but you'd be making more money on them by giving them this earliest opportunity. And there are those people who just love to own things anyhow, so they're going to buy the DVD too if they like it. Now the problem is that how do you deliver a file? So I was, one of the pieces of intellectual property I own is actually a way to use peer-to-peer networks to actually make things more secure, because what they do is they atomize and they move the files around. So I'm in a conversation with a man who was at one studio and now is at another studio as the chief of technology, and we had a very productive 45-minute conversation about what it is to implement these technologies. And then in a sort of reflective moment, he goes, you know, I really just wish I could do my ideal delivery. And I go, what's that? He goes, oh, you know, pick the people up at their house, strip them naked, put a blindfold on them, drive them in an armored car to the theater, let them watch the movie, put their clothes back on them, send them home. And I said, well, why do you think that's ideal? And he goes, well, there's no way they could capture that. Okay, so I mean, this idea of inconveniencing you. So this is a person who was running technology at a studio, and he had this incredibly impossible fantasy of how he would actually make content secure. Okay, and this was only a couple years ago, and he's still working for a studio in the same capacity. All right, I don't know that his fantasy has changed at all, but it was like, I know that the engineer I had on the line hung up in the middle of the story. Okay, because as he said to me later, he goes, that guy's never going to get it. We have this dynamic inside the business right now of people who are still scared to death of files and people for whom they see the future as files. And that dynamic is constantly being played out in daily meetings over all sorts of little issues, and we don't know where it's going to go. You know, when I meet people who want to talk about the watermarking market, they're like, well, what do you think? And I go, I think it's the only way for us rationally to embrace the digitally networked world. Well, when's it going to happen? I have no idea. Because this is a culture change, and one of the problems with Hollywood is that it's been wrong about a lot of stuff that then's made it money. And piracy is no different. It's really wrong about piracy. It has spent years saying, we're not going to do what those dumb guys in the music business did, and then it's done exactly what those guys did, and wondered why it hasn't gotten a different result.